Experiences so that we're really all learning from the same place. You know, these real estate meetups or the gurus and things like that are always like really interesting to me, because I feel like the best way to like create, you know, overall wealth and this passive income that we're all longing for is to come from a really strong community of support. And oh, that's what kind of makes me tear up, is because it kind of happens in this room here now. So thank you all for like getting off your couches and coming sitting on these couches. Round of applause to you for this. I appreciate it. You guys are great. And yeah, so we're just going to kind of talk a little bit casually about the clients we've got here. I know we had 3. Unfortunately, Ian couldn't make it because he was not feeling well. But we have next to me Griffin and Rodessa. And we also have Landon. Thank you so much for hosting in your office.
Playhouse.
Playhouse. So this is just like a really fun space. So yeah, so let's go ahead and maybe kickstart it with Griffin. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you bought, and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone, Griffin Abel. I actually also work in the commercial real estate space, but just working in that space kind of got me thinking, you know, I want to start investing in real estate on my own, and you know, really started probably in 2018, hitting the books, podcasts, kind of binging everything, like how to get started in real estate. And so I finally decided to do it, and I think it was around you know, early 2019. I came to an event kind of like this and met Sarita, and then met a lender and kind of started making connections. And you know, from there it was really getting my ducks in a row, and we just started looking at, we probably looked at like 35, 40 properties. Sarita was great, just like being very patient, walking me through all of them, and you know, kind of holding my hand throughout the way, because it was my first time doing this. So I ended up, you know, probably making an offer on one property in around the June 2019 time, and ended up closing on my first property, which is a 3-unit in Rogers Park. That was around July of 2019. So yeah, that's kind of my story. And then I currently, well, since then, bought a 4-unit, partnered with a family member in the Wicker Park neighborhood. And so that's
It's a beautiful 4-unit.
Yeah, beautiful street too. If anyone's been kind of in that like Division, Damon, Moyne corridor. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now, and planning on hopefully doing some renovations soon. There's a little bit of love and care in my unit that could be you know, upgraded. So looking forward to that.
Awesome. And Rodessa?
Hi everybody. My name is Rodessa. I'm a registered nurse, and I started looking for my house around maybe March.
Yeah, about March this year.
And I put in an offer to the house that I have now, maybe second week of April. At that time, my offer was not accepted. They went in with another person, and then 1 or 2 weeks later, Sarita called me, and she was like, "Hey, this other called me, and their deal is falling apart." So they went to go to me, and I closed on my property June 2020. So
Nice.
yeah, I got it. I found my house in Jefferson Park. So it's a 2-unit, and is it a bonus?
Yeah, so it's a 2-unit with a non-conforming third.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I live in the first floor, and I have a tenant in the second floor.
And I know a lot of you have heard me in showings and stuff preach about like it's got to have 2 exits. I need 2 exits for my Catholic guilt, or it's just not going to work. But her unit's really great because it does have the 2 exits and the ceiling height, and then there's windows I can crawl out of, and I just, for a non-conforming space, that was like the sweet spot for what I like. And and so she found it. And we got lucky that I guess the other buyers had pulled out of this, but we'll talk more about that because there's a part 2 of that just to come here. Landon, do you want to give an intro to yourself too? Sorry, I kind of went straight this way.
Yeah. My name is Landon Hoon. I work here at A&N Mortgage. My main job is making sure that the fish are fed in the back. Other than that, though, I'm a loan officer here. So I've been on the A&N for 5 years now, or just over 5 years, and what really got me going is multi-units. I love the strategy with house hacking. I'm a former house hacker, so love like consulting and different ways to get into a multi-unit with low down payment, just the strategy all around that. So if anyone does have questions with that, I'm happy to chat with you.
Awesome.
Okay.
And he's who I'm pre-approved with, if anybody cares. I'm like, on Sundays, I'm always like, hey, I think I'm going to write a letter. And of course, it's like Sunday.
I know how it goes with multi-units, you'll put in a lot of offers.
Yeah, he's writing a lot of paper for me. Okay, so one of the things that I think is really interesting about Griffin's first property that he has in Rogers Park, well, I guess I actually found it with another client who was not really interested in the location, and when I ran it by you, it just like made sense because it was probably one of the most turnkey multi-units I'd seen in that price range. With a program that doesn't really exist too much, it's kind of gone away a little bit, the Home Possible program, which I know a couple of us have used here before. But you also got in, I feel like you were my last Home Possible buyer, and then they were like, we're good.
Yeah,
we're done with the program.
We were under contract like about, I think, ready to close when they went away with that program, so I kind of got grandfathered in.
Yeah,
which was really
you
fun.
did, yeah. And I was in Europe when all of that was shutting down, and he was under contract, so it was a lot of fun to come back to that. But another thing that was really interesting is that he had inherited tenants who were Section 8 and on the voucher program. So he had a lot of success. Do you want to talk about that and like what your experience has been?
Yeah, sure. So going into it, I had never dealt with any Section 8. I didn't really know what to expect, and
just so we're clear, when we say like deal with Section 8, we mean more of like the paperwork stuff and like what you're getting into. There is a lot of stigma associated with this topic, and I want to make sure that we're talking about this in a way that's like, very progressive on what we, work with. But we also have the corrupt city of Chicago that we're working with on this part of things. So that's like what we're dealing with on this.
Yeah, so your unit actually has to be qualified as Section 8, so that was kind of a concern for me too. I didn't know if I had to, get an inspection in and had go through a bunch of other paperwork to try to get my unit like re-qualified or recertified for Section 8. But it turned out, so the owner before me had done all that and gotten the units inspected and everything ready to go, and the voucher up and running for the tenant. And so when I came in, it was actually a lot more simple than I thought. Like paperwork wise, you gotta make a trip to the CHA, which is Chicago Housing Authority, which now might be, I think, virtual. I'm not sure, but kind of just fill out a whole lot of paperwork, get your name as an owner, and get your own. I think it's like I don't know if they call it voucher number, but your own kind of number, so that you get direct deposit from the Section 8.
And the direct deposit's not like at the beginning of the month, or do they change any of that?
They changed it, yeah. So it's the first of every month, actually.
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
that's the first actually rent that I receive out of anyone is the Section 8.
Oh, that's good, because that used to be a thing where it was like a couple of days after the first, and so sometimes with people's loan payments didn't really fall in line, so you always had to make sure you had that extra money just in case it didn't hit at the right time.
Yeah. So so it's really easy. The government sends a check, tenant pays a portion, and I've got the tenant set up on auto pay. Great tenant, like pays on time every time, and I'm trying to think what else. So there's actually nuance with like rent increases. You have to go through the city to get, and you have to bring them if you're trying to increase your rent, bring them your own comparables, so do your own research, and then provide them with that support so that they can do their own research, and then it's basically up to CHA to determine like if they think that your rent is under market or over market, and if they think that it's valid to increase the rent, then they actually have to go out and do like an ad hoc inspection. But the risk with that is if you're already over market rent and you've done a request for a rent increase and they do their research and find that, they'll actually decrease your rent. So that's something to be mindful of if you're an owner with a Section 8 unit.
So it's kind of like don't rock the boat just in case it goes the other way.
Yeah, and with COVID, I wasn't really interested in taking that risk. I didn't ask for any rent increases. I still find it kind of risky for my situation, so I've kind of kept that steady, and it's been I think it's been a good experience so far.
So Rodessa, you have the 2 unit with the non-conforming third. Do you want to talk a little bit about the appraisal process that happened? Start strong on that one.
So for my appraisal, the FHA appraisal, my property got appraised $40,000 less for the listing price. So at that time, my lender emailed me and was like, "Well, you've got 3 options. We can cover the price for what it is appraised for, and then you just bring in the extra money. That thingy, which is not gonna happen because I don't have $40,000.
The difference was just not going to happen. Yeah.
And then the second one was they were like, well, we can appeal this and we can do comps and we can have the appraiser like put it up to what it was listed for. And then the third one was to go back to the seller and be like, well, this is what it's appraised for. Can you lower down the price to what it is? Which I thought was not possible because there was a $40,000 deduction. So what we were going for initially was to do the comps and have it change. But then Sarita was calling her people and she found out that the FHA appraisal would stick if ever my deal fails. So if my seller found somebody else and they decided to do an FHA loan, it's still gonna be appraised for what my appraisal. So they agreed to deduct that $40,000. They got a $40,000 discount on my property.
So she used an FHA loan, which we all know is just a lot of fun to work with, because the inspection came up and there were some items on the FHA inspection. We got all of this negotiated. We felt pretty good about the credit we got. She was not the high. Now keep this in mind. She was not the highest offer on the table. There were 2 other buyers that had pulled out before we were lucky number 3. So a lot of things kind of aligned that really helped us negotiate and moving forward with this. And in my experience of doing real estate for about 5 years now, I've had only one other appraisal not come back at property value, and that was because it was a 4 unit that sold over closer towards River Grove, and the last comp was 3 years before we were under contract. So there was no data to stick to this property, and it was all subjective anyways. So to say, all of that, I'll put that aside and just, give you that caveat because this was an example of what, FHA is really tightening up their belt on some of these inspections. But it ended up coming out in our favor because once we found out that that FHA amount is the issues that were on the FHA appraisal, we're gonna carry with that property. Okay, you've been under contract now with 3 buyers. You're gonna do what, a 4th inspection with a tenant if you go with another buyer. It really gave us so much room to negotiate a better offer. And then when we figure that out, you don't argue with it, you just try to get the reduction. And you did. Yeah, so big win there. Because then it ended up being substantially less, obviously, with the purchase price. The hard part was, and I don't know, would you think of this as a deal breaker when they basically were like, we'll take the lower price, but we're not going to give you your credit for any repair items?
No, because it was such a big discount,
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, cool. I just wanted her to say that. Because, it's one of those things that's kind of hard, especially in areas like Jefferson Park and even Rogers Park. You have different properties in these areas that are kind of tried and true. So some areas of Logan have a lot of vinyl buildings, and it's hard to compare a vinyl building to a brick building or a gray stone. It's different classifications of inventory. And we got lucky that like basically everything in her area of Jefferson Park that had sold under the last year had been a brick building, exceedingly higher than the purchase price, and the appraiser just didn't want to value it anywhere close to where it should have been, and most appraisers would. So again, just a lot of wins. Now, oh no, it was really bad. Yeah, it was really stressful. Yeah, no, it was really stressful because we had finally found something that was like, one of her units was like pretty much done. And then the top floor unit maybe needed some work, but like what I call the sexy stuff, so I know you guys have heard me say that before, like the kitchens, the bathrooms, things that are just a little bit more cosmetically appealing, and then also like appraisal appealing, which I really like because it helps with like my refinancing and stuff like that. So we found a property that met that sweet spot where she could comfortably move in, crush it as a nurse during the day, and didn't need to be wearing a hard hat when she got home in like a construction zone. So that was good. But no, while it was happening and falling apart, it was really stressful because we finally found something that was good and decent, and then it just didn't work out. So, okay, so I want to know a little bit about like we kind of talked a little bit about what you guys bought. How long did it really take you guys to get some of this stuff together? So like, I know that, we talk about like a price difference of $40,000, and that's just like not gonna happen because we need the savings. How much did you feel comfortable with like your spending, and how did that help you to purchase what you bought?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could take that one first. I would say, when I first started looking at the properties, I was also maybe a little before, but also in parallel, working with the lender to really figure out, like, with my financial situation and the strategy that I wanted to do, like what made sense from a, what price range I could look at and what areas made sense. And I would say that was kind of like, we talked about like kind of starting this off February of 2019. I'd say that was kind of like March, getting the ducks in a row for that, and then once I was pre-approved, really starting to like look at all the properties. Every day I would look at, analyze properties from my desktop, but then it made sense from the numbers that, like the quick numbers I ran, or Sarita would help run. Then we'd go, look at the properties, and I would say like probably, from March to, was it May, late May, was that when I actually like got the offer accepted, and then it's another 45 days of like your due diligence period or your inspection period where you're doing your inspection, the lender's kind of doing their due diligence and their underwriting on your financials, and then you can get the green light from the lender, and then you're ready to close it out. So that's another like 45 days. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so you felt good about that when you got the keys, I guess.
Yeah.
Once the keys are finally, they were like, okay, I feel good about spending this money on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, that makes sense. I think that for a lot of people, that's like kind of the struggle of like, and I think this is maybe my struggle, so maybe I'll just use this session as therapy. It's kind of like you finally get to a lifestyle where you're like, okay, I've got a little bit saved and I feel comfortable and happy with what I have saved. And then you find a property that like is the sweet spot. I feel like it has to be the sweet spot. So for everybody that is up here, it didn't need a lot of work, but at the same time, like I could move into this and add value and work that appreciation like I want to. So then you're not sacrificing lifestyle, that nice little bank account, the savings that you had, no matter how big or small, you feel comfortable with giving it away into the property and then creating that as the investment. And I think that at least for a lot of buyers that I talk to, there is the psychological effects of buying. That's like kind of like the thing you have to overcome with the right property. Just food for thought on that, I guess. Okay, well, so do you want to talk? Maybe we'll talk a little bit, Griffin. I'm sorry, I know I just hit you up again. So you almost bought a condo.
I did. Yep.
Dun dun dun. Do you want to talk a little bit about like maybe what happened on that?
Yeah, sure. So not right after, but I would say about a year after I lived in the Rogers Park place, my next goal was to buy a condo in a little bit closer area to the city where I would use like a renovation loan and, kind of do like a live-in renovation while I was living there and use debt to finance the renovation costs. And so, Sarita and I had looked at a handful of condos to do that. Found one in the Bucktown neighborhood, and it was a pretty long, drawn-out negotiating process, I would say.
Well, the sellers were being stupid. Did we get that on?
That's a better way to put
it. Really playing with the words at the top of the intelligence, but they were just being really, I think, unreasonable about what the property was worth, and it had been on the market for such a long period of time. Condos, especially in like Bucktown, Wicker Park, all those like fun areas, really should sit on the market for 2 seconds and be gone. And if they're not, and they're there for longer, usually there's like a bit of concern.
Yeah, and I remember they would drop the price like $5,000 and another $2,000 or something like that. It's like it doesn't really change things that much.
Yeah, you're not doing much.
But anyway, so we actually got it under contract in the condo, and thankfully Sarita had pulled the violations on
Which
property.
I can't, like, you gotta take credit for that, because you, being an investor, you knew that you should probably check for violations. So like, kudos to you. Sorry, I can't take credit for that, because you asked me, you're like, hey, are there any building code violations? And in my head, I was like, it's a condo. That doesn't happen. It's a condo. Like these things don't happen. Like the lawyers might find like litigation issues, but never like building code violations.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I'll play games here.
It was a team effort.
Right. And that's when we found some things.
Yeah, so we found a few violations, but the big one was, I think it was a coach. Well, yeah, it was a duplex, but also a coach house, and it was duplex down illegally at some point. So, for someone buying a condo and living in there for a little bit, maybe selling, wouldn't be the end of the world. But what I wanted to do was like live in, kind of flip it, and then move out and rent it out and own it for a little while. And to try to deconvert an illegal unit or get the permits to do so was just going to be too big of a risk for me. And so we tried to negotiate with the seller to fix the problem before, continuing, going hard, getting your earnest money non-refundable. And it was just going to take too long working with the city and trying to do that. So ended up pulling out of that deal while under contract, which was a bummer, but ended up with finding another opportunity, which worked out.
Blessings.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Rodessa, can you talk a little bit about your strategy for the rental of the space, the kind of like the maybe nursing housing a little bit, because I think it's interesting.
So, for my downstairs unit, I didn't want to long-term rent it. So I thought about short-term renting it to travel nurses because of what's happening right now. I feel like there's a lot of travel nurses that are coming into the city, helping out. So that's my plan for that unit. I'm still waiting for someone to come in and check it out, but I'm thinking that I can get a renter for a few months, and then I furnished the downstairs unit. So it's like an Airbnb.
Yeah. And she painted the cabinets. Megan also painted her cabinets. Megan's like, if you've got main questions, Megan, she knows. But yeah, her before and after, I might actually have to ask you to maybe post that on Instagram, because it's really good to show the perspective of how much a little bit of paint can go such a long way in these spaces. And I was really impressed with what your dad and brother did. Yeah, they did a great job. Yeah, it looks like a completely different space. And I think like for a lot of people that are not like visually inclined, it's really helpful to see those kind of photos of like how much it can to like kind of go further. So she's going to do that like more short-term rental, but then also kind of more like think about like remaining like flexible just in case, you know, we can't find somebody for as long as we need to because of the kind of the seasonal rental market we're in here now. Awesome. Were there any other highlights maybe you guys wanted to talk about before I ask you my last question, which is lessons learned? Anything maybe I didn't discuss?
You want to take that one?
No, nothing.
I don't know, I don't have time.
Yeah, I guess then my last question would be like what is something that you wish you would have known while you were buying that, like if somebody were to leave here today, they can take with them and be like, okay, that's something interesting I didn't know. And if there's nothing because I did a good job, great, but this is also like good feedback for me on what I need to keep moving forward with.
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that with kind of a two-part answer. One being like kind of more like your mindset going into it, another maybe more of like a tactical answer. But I would say just keeping the mindset. I know it's really competitive out here with the market. It can be tough to find deals, but there are a lot of opportunities that come up and they come up fast, and just preparing yourself to be ready for those and able to, you know, pivot and be flexible and change your strategy if you need to, because the market changes so quickly. Just keeping that mindset, I think, is important. And you know, it's easy to get kind of bummed out, like my experience with the condo, like, you know, pulling out of the deal is never fun, but opportunities do come up there, so just having that mindset. So that's one. And then I would say another thing is, I guess when you're closing on a property, one thing that I didn't know, and I found this out I think after I closed, is that a lot of times like you're getting everything in order, you're getting like your utilities transferred over, and there was actually like a separate building utility sub-meter.
Oh, like a common?
Yeah, like
Okay.
a common. So when I was living in the unit, like I transferred the utilities into my name, thought everything was, you know, ready to go, but there was this extra building utility that realized I had to call up and transfer that too. So I was surprised.
Were you hit with like a big bill or anything?
No, I caught it I think early enough where
Okay, good,
it was
good.
okay.
Yeah, I tell people now, especially about the water, city water just sucks, and like sometimes they can give you like a bill 3 months from now that maybe wasn't really properly transferred over. Oh, my plumber's here, yeah, you know, you know how the city is.
Customer down the street, $4,500 bill.
Jeez, yeah. And-
One toilet leak, a gallon a minute. Oh my God.
Yeah, and so those things can kind of like if you're not ready to go off the gate with like the managing of that, but it's also not just expecting the bills to come. You sort of have to, like in the city perspective, make sure you know like, oh hey, maybe it's been 2 months and I haven't gotten that bill yet. Let me call my attorney and make sure that there's no issues at the closing table with transferring that water bill over and like how that works, because that sounds like a nightmare that no first time
Oh,
homeowner wants.
somebody will pay that bill.
Yeah. Somebody
Yeah.
yeah.
Sue Chicago, we got the money.
Yeah. Was there any insights that you wanted to share on like maybe something you wish you would have known? Or?
So for me, during my closing, I wish that I like made sure that the seller gave me the deposit for the tenant upstairs, because he only paid me the rent for the month of June, and he gave back the deposit to the tenants that's in there. Like I got lucky that my tenants are good people, but if I
Interesting.
but if they're not, you know,
Yeah,
it would have
see.
been
Yeah. Oh, it's good to know now.
And then make sure that you have all your keys properly, because I didn't have the key to the back door of my unit, and then the day that I was moving, I got locked out. So good thing my tenant was upstairs and I knocked on their door. So yeah.
I remember that phone call. Oh yeah, no, I think you just have so much to keep up with. Like moving sucks. I can't believe I make people do this for a living because it's really hard. But there's a lot to keep up with on the accounting side of things, and also like the personal side on things. And even like on one of our Instagram posts, and Kayla moved, and one of the things we were talking about was like, you need to eat on move day, because you will be surprised how quickly the day goes by and you're like, oh, it's been 8 hours and I haven't had any food. Why am I being, mean? And it's like, well, you're hungry. But yeah, so that's really great insight for both of you. Did you guys have any questions? Maybe open this up to a Q&A.
So with single family homes, you always hear you want a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, good schools.
Mhm.
What are the things that we look for in multifamily? Do we want the units to have 3-bedroom, 2-bath? Do we want
That's
the
a
units
good
to have
question.
2-bedroom, 1-bath?
Yeah.
What are we looking for?
So I think for me, I think the biggest thing is that you want units that are pretty comparable, or the bedrooms are pretty comparable in size in the units. So let's say you have a roommate situation or a family coming in, or a couple, that people are able to live cohesively as roommates, and there's not a conquer and divide where somebody gets a really big bedroom and then the other person gets a very small closet as a room, and so then the rents are split up differently. So for me, for value, that's the most important thing I tell my clients. When you guys were looking at properties, what would you say was the big thing for multi-units for you?
I would say I really like the 3 to 4 units. I just think they work the best, especially if you're living in one of them. I think similar to single family homes, location to schools can be important for your tenants. Location to public transit. I know a lot of people are working from home right now, but I do think there's still a lot of value, being close to DL or the Metro or bus lines. And then personally, I like brick buildings in Chicago, so I've got a couple brick buildings. But it just kind of depends on I guess your strategy and what you feel comfortable living in.
So you're thinking what's easiest to rent out? That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have a mindset if you're living in the property, or even if you're not, would you live here long term? Would I personally live in this property and like it long term? There's a good chance your tenants would as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I have to visualize myself in it, and so many times that's the hardest part, I guess, too, for a lot of my clients, looking and purchasing things is who is the tenant? What does that tenant's life look like? And how long do they live in a space like that? Or are you constantly having to turn over that unit and redo it, or hit with vacancies, all of those things, that affects the numbers. And I think for a lot of multi-units, for people, the goal is obviously to make money at this. I mean, that's really what the philosophy that most people are kind of going at this for. But at a minimum, you want to be able to buy a place that is going to be cheaper than what you would pay in rent in the area. Now, the hard part about that is you constantly have to think about the phases and the strategy of it. What do the tenants live like? How do I live here? And then what happens when I leave the property? How does this produce the type of income that I need to either buy another property or just not live there and have it make cash flow for me? But that's sort of a multi-phase strategy for even condos too. When we were looking at condos, it was the same thing. We were talking about the same principles of, sort of a 3-phase strategy on that.
I have a question.
Oh.
I'm sorry, you go first, Francis.
All right, a couple questions for the panel. I'll start with Landon. Can you talk about the refi process a little bit? Once you purchase the property, you need 20% equity in order to refi, and kind of where you have your clients taking a look. Is it a good time to refi? Kind of just speak on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I get a lot of clients that when they first buy, they buy with as little down as possible, maybe FHA or some kind of lower down payment program. But then when they buy it, they have the intentions of fixing up the unit. Maybe it's a ton of renovations, or maybe very minor. But with those people that do that, they can often then refinance, and they have typically more equity in the property. And then when they have more equity in the property, that opens up a lot of new financing options to put themselves in a better spot. So we have clients that often will do that. They'll buy with little down, and they'll put some work into the property. We'll get new appraisal on the property, and we'll appraise a lot higher, and then we'll refinance them to a conventional mortgage, which typically the interest rate is lower than, and then they just have more equity in the property. And then now that they have so much more equity in the property, we'll look into a home equity line of credit afterwards. So what a home equity line of credit is, it's basically a giant credit card with a much lower interest rate. But the nice part about a HELOC is that you can use a HELOC for a down payment on a future home. So as a lender, we can use loans that are backed by collateral. So with the HELOC being tied to a home, you guys can use that for a down payment. So by getting yourself into a better position on the refinance, and then also having that HELOC for future purchases, just kind of like makes the whole house stacking stuff more fun and more strategy.
And it's just like got more money to play with.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
like, that grows a bit faster than just like cash flow. Because cash flow is great. I mean, like that's what we want ultimately. But the amount of money that my clients have done and created using the forced depreciation strategy is usually a lot better than what their cash flow was anyways.
Yeah.
But it costs money to do that too. So it's like you can't spend all of your money buying the property. I'm sorry, I'm like talking and this was not even my question. But it's this. Sorry.
I jumped in.
That's
I
good.
follow up on
Yeah.
that, like, so, but, like, for refinancing, like, we're probably, like, when you refinance at current rates, right? So,
Yep.
like, I mean, the rates should go up in about a year or two, so would that be a good plan to start right now to say, oh, I'm gonna refinance in 2 years?
So
Because
I wouldn't necessarily plan on refinancing because, like you said, like the biggest factor in interest rates is the market. So if the market rates drop, that's great. But there are other factors, of course, like that being like equity percentage, credit scores, and so on. And it does seem like rates just keep dropping and dropping, so it seems like they can't possibly drop more. But yeah, I wouldn't go into the purchase being like, hey, I'm gonna refinance to lower my interest rate, and bank on that just because maybe the market shifts and you can't do that. But maybe you could go into it knowing like, hey, I'm gonna refinance to get out of an FHA mortgage and get into a conventional mortgage, which then opens up the option of FHA again or something like that. But yeah, I wouldn't go into it banking on being able to lower your rate just because the market's so unpredictable.
well, I was thinking more of like PMI, right? So
Oh,
if
yeah.
you get in
Yeah.
at a low and then you want to refinance to get rid of that PMI, but then in 2 years the rates are now up, and now I refinance and now I'm still paying the same. Like it's almost like that. I'm just trying to think: do I want to put, like, say I could do a low
Yeah.
interest payment and get my PMI right now? Is that even the best thing to do? Should I just put in 10% or 20% to get rid of that PMI, lock in the low rate now, and then just forget about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's say you're buying a one-unit property, like a condo or a single-family home. That PMI will fall off automatically once you get to 22% equity or at 20% equity if you ask your servicer to remove the PMI. But on a multi-unit, that's not true, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. So on a multi-unit, the PMI does not fall off automatically when you get to 22% equity. But you can, after a 2-year waiting period, you can get an appraisal on the property, and if you can show that it has 65% loan to value, then you can get the PMI removed. So there are ways to get it removed
You can get
without refinancing,
Okay.
but then there's a waiting period, and you have to have a pretty high, equity percentage in the place.
And I think it really depends on the property, right? Because when you're talking about condos to single family homes to multi-units, the strategy is so different and the price range is so different. You're right in thinking that these, to refinance in a year may not work in the numbers, but it might for different properties in different locations. And that's why we have a lot of competition right now.
Right.
And that's why when you see these properties go online and then 2 days later they're completely gone, you knew that strategy was in line with somebody's thinking on what to do. And maybe not necessarily refinancing, but maybe another pathway for what Landon was saying with switching from FHA to conventional or doing HELOC. There's other opportunities there than just oh, I gotta refinance to get rid of PMI. That's a thing for sure, but it's not the only one.
I definitely do have some clients I work with consistently that they buy with an FHA loan, and then they'll do work, refinance a conventional, and then use FHA again, because you can only have one active FHA at a time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a strategy that some people use.
It's hop.
Yeah.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, Griffin, if you could just speak on section 8 in a bit more details. What's the rent split between the landlord and the tenant? Would you have approved that tenant if they weren't section 8? I know you inherited them, but you're kind of looking at their income now. Would you have approved them without section 8? And also, I know you said the landlord did these fixes prior, but what are fixes that the city of Chicago will ask you to do? Because I've heard horror stories for example, there's something wrong with the porch, and maybe there's a ledge in the porch that's cracked, and then all right, now you have to spend $10,000 to repair a whole porch.
Yeah.
So if you could just go into a bit more detail in section 8.
Yeah, so to answer, I guess, the first part of your question, the split just kind of depends on the tenant situation. It's based on, you know, their income and what the market rents are for the property. So that can fluctuate, and it also could depend on if they have any kids living in the property or I guess any relatives or dependents. Yeah. And then
So in your case, what is the split, if you don't mind?
it's about, but I think in terms of percentages, I think it's like 10 to 20% the tenant, and then the rest is the government. Yeah. And to be honest with you, so I inherited this tenant. He's paid his rent on time. He's on auto pay, so I haven't like done any sort of request for like financials or re-vetted him or anything like that. He's been a great tenant. I didn't really have a reason to. That's certainly something that you can do if you're, you know, re-signing the tenant and you want to make sure you're not taking on a risk with maybe just like anybody, like someone could lose their job or someone could, their financial situation could be different. So it's all about kind of minimizing the risk. But in my situation, things there have been pretty solid.
I have a follow-up question on Section 8. I'm sorry, I know you had a question, but this is easy.
Oh, you're
to
good.
ask
Go
now.
for it, jump in, I love it.
So yeah, the fair housing laws, do they even actually allow us to say no to Section 8 clients? I know you inherited yours, but are we even allowed to say no?
So no, you cannot tell us a person, I'm sorry, I'll just, because this is a legal thing, I'm just gonna jump here on this one, and not have you fall on the sword. You know, you can't tell somebody I'm not gonna accept your application because you're Section 8, and you absolutely cannot put it on any type of marketing that you have for your space or your unit. And I always tell clients, and I give people like, you know, I know when we were posting one of your, maybe it was the space you moved out of, you know, the marketing for the unit, just to make sure that you are doing everything that you can to go with the Section 8, I'm sorry, the fair housing laws, and not discriminate, not only with Section 8, but any of the other discrimination laws that they have. But you can't tell someone that we're not gonna accept you because you're Section 8. There's gonna be probably, you know, other reasons why maybe you don't wanna accept them. And I would say that case by case, you wanna probably talk to me offline about it. So if you did have somebody that maybe you didn't feel comfortable with for whatever reason, that you're not citing that specific reason. But I also think Griffin's tenant highlights the good of the program and also the good that it can do him. The tenant has been, I know I met him when I saw it with the first showing and also for our inspection. He was wonderful and so hospitable.
Yeah.
So I think that what I want to do is debunk the myths, some of the myths that are on Section 8 on how difficult the program is to work with, or the stigma of working with the tenants, because there's a lot of good out there. But like Francis said, there's also a lot of bad. But let's be real, that's every tenant out there. You're Section 8 or you're not. That is the high risk of real estate. But to answer your question, always ask me about any marketing you have, and if you've got anything that feels funny when you're interviewing tenants, we can kind of work through that case by case. And it should be case by case, and don't hesitate to ask me any questions you have. Because so many times on Bigger Pockets, you see like somebody has posted something stupid on their listing of their rental, and you're like, well, why did you say that? You're opening yourself up for, you know, any type of like inquiry you have into who you are in your business. Like it's not worth the risk.
Yeah.
Can I just have a follow-up question? But then you mentioned that for Section 8, you have to get your apartment or your house approved to get that. So if somebody looks at your apartment which you haven't listed, and then they say, oh, I'm Section 8, you cannot just say, okay, fine, because you still have to go through that process. And is it not then up to you that if you're willing to go through that process? Just because you said there's so much paperwork involved, right?
Yeah, that's a part of it. A lot of the landlords just don't want to do more paperwork to work with Section 8, and not even Section 8, the city.
Right.
And that's the hard part of it. So oftentimes, you know, there are ways around that. So if you have a tenant that comes in or a possible candidate that comes in and says, hey, I want to rent this space, but you're not willing to do the paperwork, you don't want to tell the person, hey, I'm not willing to accept you as a candidate because I'm not willing to do the paperwork. You really don't want to say anything that's going to negate anything to do with Section 8. whatsoever. Even if it's for your own paperwork and admin, mindset, even if it has nothing to do with the stigma, you still just don't want to say anything like that. And I think it's just because anything you say could be held against you. Interpretation can go so many different directions, and you don't want to open yourself up to any type of an interpretation that could be frowned upon.
No, but I also mean just like, what if my rent is higher than would be allowed, and I will go through all the paperwork, and at the end, they're gonna say it's too high. Like, you would not even get approved of the second pay.
Yeah, that's possible.
that's a risk.
Yeah, that's a big risk to that. And why sometimes people don't want to do it, or like Griffin was saying, like when it maybe came to about the time you'd want a rental increase. Granted, there was COVID and a lot that was going on.
Yeah.
Like, it is hard because you don't want to risk having to do anything more that's going to disrupt pretty much a peaceful situation you have.
Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, they require them coming out and doing an inspection. So if you're not necessarily ready for that or prepared for your inspection, then that's just kind of another potential hiccup.
And the city's specific. So there's definitely risks on this, and honestly we could probably talk all night about like the pros and cons of Section 8. But I did want to highlight that because I do think that Griffin had really good success with it this last year and a half, 2 years almost.
Yeah, it's been great so far.
Wow.
Section 8. Yeah, us too.
Yeah.
So I have a quick question, kind of going back to what we were talking about with the refinancing and kind of planning ahead, coupled with his beautiful 4-unit in Wicker Park. So like, we all want to scale and be able to set ourselves up to buy the next one and the next one. So when I hear a brick, beautiful 4-unit, I know Damon division, that's going to be a lot of money. So big, even at 20, that's going to be beyond FHA loan limits. You're going to need to put a really healthy down payment there. It's going to tie up a lot of capital. Sort of what was the strategy, or what did you guys discuss to make you pull the trigger on something like that? Were you kind of just planning on looking at the historical appreciation and kind of planning to tap into that at some point down the line to be able to buy more? Or I guess just, I know it's kind of all over the place, the question, but what was the thought process there from an investment standpoint, buying in an area that's already blown up?
Yeah, so that strategy was a little different than my first property, and there's a few reasons to that. One was that I partnered with a family member that brought a good amount of capital to the deal, and so that allowed myself to partner up and look at like a higher price range, and then it was kind of centered around a place that I could see myself really living for a long period of time. So there's the balancing act between if you want to, it might make more sense for some people to live in a more area that's kind of up and coming and appreciating and has a lot more room to grow versus something that's a little more established. So I kind of thought about that, and for that property was more on the other end of that spectrum. That said, it wasn't a low down payment with PMI. We put 25% down, I believe. And so, you put enough money down, your cash flow works really well. So, although Wicker Park isn't, the next neighborhood that's going to be taking off in like double-digit % growth next year, I think there is still some steady Eddie appreciation, some steady cash flow. So it's kind of like a long-term play there, and then getting the benefit of living somewhere that I really like.
And it's also, so when you are talking about these stately, and like kudos to you for picking up on that. I'm actually really impressed that you knew that was a different strategy, and you're 100% accurate on that. But when you're talking about properties in some of these, historically significant areas like Lincoln Park, Lakeview, and Wicker Park and Bucktown, you sometimes find these properties that are basically a piece of history that look like that quintessential Chicago multi-unit that you see in a postcard. And those properties, and your building is really beautiful, it's really something. Those properties have this way of kind of standing the test of time. So when you have like a Greystone maybe that comes on the market, things like that are like a little bit more, historically important to what the multi-unit is. It's kind of a different category of inventory altogether. And for this particular property, one of the things that was really important to me for any type of a strategy play was that the top unit was basically a vintage unit. Like, I don't know how to kind of understate how much stained glass built-ins.
Get like a 1950s, I don't even know what to call it, like a vintage stove that looks like.
Oh yeah, the stove that was like.
Doesn't look safe,
The
but
tenant said you
it's
basically
pretty.
have to light on
Oh,
fire
gosh.
to start, and the tenants that lived up there, liked it and lived very beautifully with their own eclectic design. But like, it's very much has been frozen in time. But the great thing about that was that there were all these vintage elements, so that when Griffin and his partner decide to like do some renovation, this hasn't been touched 50 times in the last 100 years with crappy contractors removing the beautiful built-ins or the stained glass or the shutters that open up. Like, there's features in this property that you don't find. And that was very exciting to me, to keep some of that historical importance into the property, but also like the 2 units in the lower level were possibly the best rehabs I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So the building, 4 units, it was kind of a mixed bag of all different plays. So yes, for the location, there was still a lot of strategy there, even though it's a different type of building altogether. Yeah. Awesome. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
One last question.
Sure.
Rodessa, how do you advertise to registered nurses? I do Airbnb, and like travel nurses, I know they like get a budget to go to certain areas, especially with COVID. Like, I hosted like a travel nurse, and they were able to find my space through Airbnb. But I think it could be such a lucrative market, if you target like travel.
Have you heard about Furnish Finder?
I have. I use them.
I have a Furnish Finder account, and I work in the hospital.
Yeah.
I kind of have like contacts with our nursing supervisor. If they have like people that are coming in, I can tell them, hey, this is my unit. If they're interested, they can check it out. So that's where I'm getting it. You need an inside person.
You guys need to connect after this, is what it sounds like.
I'll add one more thing. So I would say one of like my biggest tip, when buying, like especially your first multi-unit, is to use a realtor who really knows multi-units. So there's a lot of great realtors in Chicago, and a lot of those people are great for just condos in downtown, and they're not great at multi-units. So really get a realtor who's great with multi-units, and I can vouch that Sarita is amazing with multi-units and knows her stuff inside and out. So
A lender.
yeah.
Yeah.
And a quick horror story with my first house hack was a couple of years ago, and I get a lot of referrals from realtors. So I'm like, all right, I'm not going to use a realtor because I don't want to offend anyone. So I didn't use a realtor. Definitely should have used a realtor. And the place I bought was previously owned by a gang member who recently went to jail, and I was dealing with new bullet holes through the house like daily. So
Nice.
I sold it under 60 days of buying it. So use a good realtor who's good with multi-units is my advice. So I can tell you what not to do. It's all good. I actually sold it for like $40,000 when I bought it for. So like, it ended up working out.
Okay.
So-
All right. Well, you got your street cred too, so
Yeah.
there's something, I guess.
It was never shot.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure maybe some of you guys have some more questions, and you can kind of talk to us offline. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to come out today. Please eat pizza, because I'm not taking it home with me, and we've got cookies and stuff over there, and booze, and yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, wait, I guess I should announce, I'm sorry, I'm so long-winded. I'm an indoor cat right now, y'all. The next event that we have in October, the 13th, which is also a Wednesday, is going to be with Westward 360. They're a property management company. I know we've heard them talk like a bunch of times before, and I love them. They're going to be talking about tenant laws and things like that, tenant rights. That's probably a great place for some of those Section 8 questions that we have too, as well as like the eviction process now, especially with COVID and everything. And then in November, hopefully we're still doing this in November, with COVID and everything. Jason of Black Forest Properties is going to be hosting, and we're going to talk about scale in that one. He is one of my clients that basically started investing with a 4-unit, and now he owns over 100, and I think he's got like 150 or something like at this point. I don't know if I can even keep up with him. But he's like a really great resource on how to scale. Also, he's got hustle and negotiation skills like I've never seen, and as a realtor, I've learned so much from our partnership on this stuff. So those are some things to look out for. But yeah, sorry, now we're actually wrapping up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.